On an ordinary Saturday morning, Lucas Hargrove, a struggling single father and freelance mechanic, walked into a salvage yard looking for a simple replacement part. Instead, he stopped in front of a rust-covered coupe that everyone else had already given up on. The car looked worthless, its paint had peeled away. Rust covered nearly every panel, and it was only days away from being crushed. Yet, something about its shape made Lucas hesitate. Without being able to explain why, he paid just $100 and towed it home. The moment he arrived, his neighbor, Diana Caldwell, laughed loudly enough for the entire street to hear. She mocked Lucas for wasting money and even claimed he was teaching his young son the wrong lesson about life. Lucas didn't argue. He quietly rolled the forgotten car into his garage and went to work, convinced there was more beneath the rust than anyone could see. Then, only 5 days later, the entire neighborhood fell silent when a legendary racing icon arrived at Lucas's driveway, carrying a $5 million check. What could possibly be hidden inside a car everyone believed was nothing more than scrap metal? Stay until the end, because this true value wasn't hidden beneath the rust. It was hidden beneath everyone's assumptions. Lucas Hargrove was 34 years old, a freelance mechanic, and a single father raising his 7-year-old son, Wyatt, in a modest house on Marlowe Street. His life was not the kind people noticed from a distance. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, prepared Wyatt's school lunch, checked the handwritten schedule on the refrigerator, and stepped into the converted garage behind the house where he repaired cars for local customers. Word of mouth kept him busy, but only just enough to cover the bills. Some months were harder than others, yet Lucas never complained and never asked anyone for sympathy. 2 years earlier, his wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident on the interstate. The other driver had survived, but Sarah had not, and the medical debt from the weeks following the accident remained. Lucas paid it slowly, one amount at a time, while trying to keep Wyatt's life as stable as possible. Wyatt was a quiet, thoughtful boy who carried a worn stuffed bear almost everywhere. Sarah had named the bear Bolt because she had loved racing, fast cars, and the smell of engine oil. One of Bolt's button eyes was missing, and the stitching had been repaired more than once, but Wyatt treated it like the most valuable thing he owned. Lucas rarely spoke about Sarah unless Wyatt asked. When his son had questions, he answered honestly, but he did not volunteer memories. His grief had become something he carried quietly, beneath the routines of work, school, meals, and bedtime. The only person on the street who understood Lucas well was Elijah Cross, a mechanic who owned a small repair shop nearby. Elijah was the kind of friend who knew when to speak and when silence was more useful. On Friday evenings, he often brought sandwiches to Lucas's garage, and the two men ate while Wyatt did homework at the workbench. Across the street lived Diana Caldwell, a 31-year-old real estate broker who had moved into the neighborhood 18 months earlier. Her house was always perfect. Her white Audi was always parked at the same angle, and the flowers in her window boxes never seemed to fade. Diana was not openly cruel, but she judged quickly and spoke before thinking. She believed Lucas's house, his truck, and his garage lowered the appearance of the street. Once, she had politely suggested that he might be happier in a neighborhood that suited him better. Lucas had looked at her for a moment, then gone back inside. Diana saw his silence as rudeness. Lucas saw it as the only response worth giving. One Saturday morning in April, Lucas drove to Voss Auto Salvage to pick up a carburetor for a customer. The salvage yard belonged to Carter Voss, a practical man who had spent more than 30 years buying and selling old vehicles and parts. That morning, Carter was clearing out a large group of cars from a private storage facility whose lease had expired. The estate responsible for them wanted everything gone by Monday, and Carter planned to crush whatever did not sell. Lucas was walking along the back row when he saw the coupe. It sat beneath a leaning sheet metal roof in the far corner of the yard. Its black paint had almost disappeared beneath rust. The roof seams were damaged, and the body looked as though it had been forgotten for decades. Most people would have seen only scrap metal. Lucas saw something else. The wheelbase seemed unusually long for a car of that size. The windshield angle was steeper than expected, and the rear wheel arches did not look machine-pressed. They appeared to have been shaped by hand. Lucas moved closer and placed his palm against the rear quarter panel. Beneath the dirt and corrosion, he could feel the difference. The metal had been formed with patience and skill. Someone had spent a great deal of time designing and building this car. Carter walked over and looked at him. "That one is $100, he said. "Take it today, or it goes into the crusher Monday morning." Lucas stood there without answering. He thought about Wyatt's shoes, which were already too small. He thought about the electricity bill waiting on the kitchen counter. Spending $100 on a car that did not run made no practical sense. Yet the proportions, the handmade bodywork, and the unusual structure told him that this vehicle was not ordinary. He paid Carter the money. Before leaving, Lucas opened the driver's door and looked inside. A small piece of an old sticker came loose from the bottom of the doorframe and fell to the ground. Most of it had faded, but a portion of a symbol remained visible. Lucas picked it up and slipped it into his pocket without examining it closely. Elijah helped him tow the coupe home behind his pickup truck. The drive was slow, and the old car wandered slightly behind them because its steering was dead. When they turned onto Marlowe Street, several neighbors stopped to watch. Children paused on their bicycles. A man walking his dog remained at the corner, and curtains moved in nearby windows. Diana was standing at her gate with a cup of coffee in her hand. As the damaged car rolled into Lucas's driveway, she laughed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You just taught your son the fastest way to waste money," she said. Someone across the street laughed briefly. Lucas also heard the words, "poor kid," spoken under someone's breath. Wyatt was standing near the driveway with his backpack still on, watching the scene. Lucas did not turn toward Diana. He stepped out of the truck and calmly began removing the tow rope. "Go inside and get my tool bag," he told Wyatt. The boy looked at Diana once, then turned toward the car. He tilted his head slightly, studying it the same way his father had studied it in the salvage yard. Then he went inside. Lucas did not defend himself, argue, or perform anger for the people watching. He had already survived pain far greater than the judgment of a neighbor. He simply moved the car into the garage and closed the door. That night, after Wyatt had gone to sleep, Lucas switched on 2 work lights, turned on the small radio beside his tools, and began cleaning the car slowly. He started with the driver's footwell, removing dirt and old grease layer by layer. Beneath the grime, he discovered a chassis number stamped directly into the metal. Lucas stopped. It did not match any standard vehicle identification system he knew. The strange prefix began with the letters R, A, and C, followed by several numbers and letters. He photographed it with his phone and searched through online records, but found no clear match. Then he remembered the faded sticker fragment in his pocket. Under the work light, he could make out part of a stylized wheel and what appeared to be a flame beside it. Lucas carefully taped the fragile piece to clean paper and placed it beside the photograph of the chassis number. For the first time that night, he understood that the $100 car in his garage might be hiding a history no one on Marlowe Street was prepared to believe. Lucas spent the rest of the night studying the strange chassis number, but every search led nowhere. It matched no production vehicle, no racing registry he could access, and no manufacturer he had ever worked on. The mystery only grew deeper. Before sunrise, he called Elijah and asked him to come over. By the time the coffee had finished brewing, Elijah was already lying beneath the coupe on a rolling creeper. He examined the frame without speaking, moving slowly from the front suspension to the rear crossmembers. Several minutes later, he rolled back out and stared at Lucas with an expression somewhere between disbelief and excitement. "This frame has been reinforced by hand," he said quietly. "Every junction has additional bracing. None of this came from a factory." Lucas opened what remained of the hood, and together they inspected the engine. Even after decades of neglect, it was obvious that someone had invested enormous effort into the mechanical design. The engine block had been carefully machined. The suspension geometry was unlike any ordinary road car, and several components appeared to have been custom built rather than purchased from a supplier. "This wasn't someone's weekend project," Elijah said. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing." The more Lucas examined the coupe, the more convinced he became that it had once served a purpose far beyond ordinary transportation. That afternoon, he searched online until he found a small forum dedicated to vintage racing vehicles. Most of its members were longtime collectors, engineers, and historians who specialized in forgotten competition cars. Lucas uploaded photographs of the chassis number, the suspension, the unusual bodywork, and the faded sticker fragment he had found inside the driver's door. Then he carefully explained exactly where he had discovered the vehicle and asked if anyone recognized it. He expected only a few replies. Instead, dozens of responses appeared before the next morning. Some members believed the coupe was simply an old custom-built race car assembled from aftermarket parts decades earlier. Others disagreed. A few experienced historians pointed out details that could not easily be explained, especially the handcrafted body panels and the unusual chassis construction. One message immediately caught Lucas's attention. "If that chassis number is genuine," the writer said, "you may be looking at one of the most important missing prototypes in American endurance racing." Another member sent him a private message only minutes later. "Stop posting public photographs. If this is real, you have no idea what you found." Lucas printed the discussion and placed it in a folder. He wasn't ready to believe any of it yet, but he knew one thing for certain: the coupe deserved a much closer inspection. That evening, Wyatt came into the garage carrying Bolt, the stuffed bear his mother had named years earlier. As always, he sat quietly on the overturned plastic bucket and watched his father work. After several minutes, Wyatt looked at the old coupe and asked, "Does the car have a name?" Lucas smiled slightly. "Not yet." Wyatt studied the car with surprising seriousness before answering, "I think it should be called Bolt." For a brief moment, Lucas stopped working. Hearing the name brought back memories of Sarah and the countless stories she had told Wyatt about racing. He looked at his son and nodded. "I think that's the perfect name." Over the next day, Lucas continued removing layers of old paint with extraordinary care. While sanding one section of the passenger side pillar, he noticed a different color hidden beneath the faded black exterior. A metallic white-blue finish slowly appeared. Unlike anything used on ordinary production cars, he carefully removed a little more paint. Hidden beneath it was something far more important. Stamped directly into the steel was a small signature beside a serial number. It wasn't a sticker or a plate. The mark had been pressed into the metal during construction. Lucas photographed it immediately. For hours, he searched through digital archives, engineering publications, and old racing magazines. Finally, shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning, he found a decades-old article describing a famous endurance racing team that had operated during the 1970s and early 1980s. Near the end of the article was a short paragraph mentioning a revolutionary development prototype believed to have been destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1983. The prototype had never raced officially, yet its experimental chassis design had quietly influenced endurance race cars for years afterward. Beside the article was a photograph of the team's chief engineer. His name was Marcus Webb. The signature in the article matched the signature stamped into Lucas's car perfectly. Marcus Webb had died in a testing accident before the warehouse fire, and the prototype had disappeared shortly afterward. For more than 40 years, everyone believed it had been destroyed forever. Lucas leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. The rust-covered coupe sitting in his garage was no longer just an unusual collector's car. It might be the only surviving example of a legendary racing prototype. News spread through Marlow Street far faster than Lucas expected. Elijah had mentioned the discovery to his wife, who repeated it to another neighbor, and before long, almost everyone on the street had heard some version of the story. People suddenly found reasons to walk past Lucas's garage. One neighbor claimed to be looking for a lost cat. Another asked to borrow a tire gauge. Both spent far more time staring at the covered coupe than asking their questions. Lucas quietly pulled a blue tarp over the vehicle and kept working behind closed doors. When Diana first heard that the old $100 car might actually be worth millions, she laughed. The story sounded ridiculous. Still, curiosity eventually got the better of her. She searched the internet for the name Dominic Ashford, the former owner of the racing team mentioned in the article. Within minutes, she discovered that he had become one of the wealthiest figures in the automotive world, with a fortune built on racing, engineering, and rare collector cars. Buried near the end of one profile was a detail that immediately caught her attention. For more than a decade, Dominic Ashford had been searching for a missing racing prototype believed to have vanished after the warehouse fire. Diana slowly closed her laptop. For the first time, she looked across the street at Lucas's garage without confidence. The following evening, an email arrived in Lucas's inbox. It was from Giselle Hartman, executive assistant to Dominic Ashford. The message was short and direct. Mr. Ashford had seen the photographs posted online and wished to inspect the vehicle personally. If Lucas agreed, a meeting could be arranged within 24 hours. Lucas read the email 3 times before quietly setting his phone on the table. The mystery that had begun with a forgotten $100 coupe was about to change his life forever. Saturday morning arrived exactly 5 days after Lucas had brought the rust-covered coupe home from the salvage yard. He woke at 5, as he always did, brewed coffee, and prepared breakfast for Wyatt, even though there was no school. Their routine never changed, simply because life had become unusual. After breakfast, Lucas put on the best flannel shirt he owned. It was old, but clean, and for a brief moment he wondered whether it mattered. Then he decided it didn't. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply meeting the man who might finally explain the mystery sitting inside his garage. Wyatt noticed the unusual atmosphere. "Is someone special coming today?" he asked. "Maybe," Lucas replied with a quiet smile. "And is Bolt staying?" Lucas looked toward the covered coupe inside the garage. "We'll see what the day brings." Around 9 o'clock, Elijah arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. Lucas hadn't invited him, but Elijah understood that some moments deserved a witness. Neither man spoke much. They simply stood in the driveway waiting. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black Cadillac stopped in front of the house. Across the street, Diana Caldwell watched from behind her front window, coffee forgotten in her hands. She had been waiting for nearly 20 minutes after noticing the unfamiliar luxury car entering the neighborhood. The passenger door opened first. Dominic Ashford stepped out slowly. At 58 years old, the legendary racing entrepreneur carried himself with quiet confidence rather than authority. Years of engineering and motorsport had left their mark on his hands more than on his appearance. Behind him came Giselle Hartman, his executive assistant, carrying a tablet. Dominic walked directly toward the garage. He said nothing. Lucas pulled back the blue tarp, revealing the coupe exactly as he had found it, still unfinished, still scarred by decades of neglect. Dominic circled the vehicle slowly. His fingertips brushed lightly across the weathered body panels. Occasionally, he stopped to study a detail before continuing. The silence inside the garage seemed almost sacred. Finally, Dominic stopped near the rear quarter panel. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought it was gone forever." Lucas looked at him carefully. "You know this car?" Dominic turned toward him. "I know it, because I helped build it." The garage fell completely silent. "It was 1,971, Dominic continued. "It took nearly 2 years to complete. It wasn't built for production. It wasn't even built to race officially. It was created to prove an idea." He slowly walked to the passenger side and knelt beside the B-pillar, where Lucas had uncovered the stamped signature. When Dominic saw the mark, he reached out with one finger and rested it gently against the steel. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Finally, he took a slow breath. "Marcus Webb." His voice carried both pride and grief. "He was my chief engineer and my closest friend." Lucas remained silent, allowing Dominic the time to continue. Marcus believed the chassis could be designed differently. Everyone told him it couldn't work. For 4 years, he refined the geometry until we finally built this prototype. It never entered a race, But everything we learned from this car changed endurance racing for years afterward. Dominic smiled faintly. He always insisted that an engineer should sign his work the same way an artist signs a painting. Lucas looked once more at the small signature pressed into the steel. So everyone believed it was destroyed? Dominic nodded. The warehouse fire in 1983 destroyed almost everything we had. We were told this prototype burned with the rest. I searched for it twice over the following years, but eventually I accepted that it was gone. He looked around the garage before returning his eyes to Lucas. So tell me, how did you find it? Lucas answered honestly. He explained that he had only gone to the salvage yard for a carburetor. He described seeing the coupe sitting alone in the back row, waiting to be crushed. He admitted that he couldn't explain exactly why he stopped, only that the proportions of the car felt different. It looked like someone had spent years thinking about every single line, Lucas said quietly. It didn't look accidental. Dominic stared at him, then a small smile appeared. Marcus used those exact words when he showed me the original drawings. For a moment, neither man spoke. It wasn't simply that Lucas had recognized a rare car. He had understood the intention behind its design. At that moment, Wyatt quietly stepped into the garage carrying Bolt beneath one arm. Lucas motioned him closer. This is my son. Dominic smiled warmly at the boy. Wyatt looked at the old man, then back at the coupe. I named it Bolt. Dominic's expression softened. That's a perfect name. Wyatt studied him with the curiosity only a child could have. Did you miss it? Dominic looked at the car again before answering. Very much. My dad says people miss things that matter. Dominic nodded slowly. Your dad is right. Giselle stepped forward and unlocked the tablet she had been holding. She turned the screen toward Lucas. Displayed across the purchase agreement was a single number. 500万美元. Lucas read it without saying a word. Dominic finally broke the silence. I don't negotiate on something like this. He looked directly into Lucas's eyes. That's what this car is worth to history. And to me, you don't have to answer today. If you decide to keep it, I'll respect that decision. Lucas lowered his eyes to the screen again. $5 million. Enough to erase every debt. Enough to secure Wyatt's future. Enough to change his life forever. Yet instead of looking at the number, Lucas looked back at the coupe, resting beneath the work lights. He thought about Sarah. He thought about Wyatt choosing the name Bolt without knowing the car's history. He thought about Marcus Webb spending years creating something the world had forgotten. For several long seconds, nobody inside the garage spoke. Outside, neighbors watched from windows and front porches, unaware that the forgotten $100 coupe had just been identified as one of the most significant missing racing prototypes in American motorsport history. Lucas finally lifted his eyes toward Dominic. He still hadn't given his answer. And somehow, everyone in the garage understood that the decision he was about to make was no longer only about money. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what you would do if you were standing in Lucas's place. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories with unforgettable life lessons. Life on Marlowe Street slowly returned to normal, but for Lucas Hargrove, everything had changed in the quietest possible way. He still woke before sunrise, still worked in the same garage, and still spent his evenings with Wyatt. The $5 million had given him security, but it had never changed the man he already was. The old garage remained open. The familiar radio still sat on the shelf beside the wrenches, and Friday evenings with Elijah continued just as before. Lucas had never been searching for wealth. He had simply trusted his experience when everyone else trusted appearances. Diana eventually moved away from the neighborhood. No one celebrated her departure, and Lucas never spoke badly about her. The lesson had already been learned. Some mistakes stay with us far longer than any apology can erase, reminding us to think before judging another person's choices. The restored prototype soon became one of the museum's most admired exhibits. Thousands of visitors stopped to read the story of Marcus Webb, the engineer whose vision had quietly influenced an entire generation of racing technology. They also read about Lucas Hargrove, the mechanic who recognized value hidden beneath decades of rust, and about 7-year-old Wyatt, whose simple choice of the name, Bolt, became part of the car's history forever. Whenever Lucas and Wyatt visited the museum, they never stayed long. Wyatt always smiled when he saw the display, squeezed his father's hand, and asked if they could get something to eat afterward. Those ordinary moments became far more valuable than the money that had changed their lives. Sometimes the greatest opportunities arrive looking like broken dreams. Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest simply haven't learned to see beyond the surface. Lucas never proved anyone wrong by arguing with them. He proved them wrong through patience, quiet confidence, and the willingness to believe in something others had already abandoned. In the end, this story was never really about a $5 million car. It was about recognizing hidden value, honoring those who came before us, and remembering that true worth is rarely obvious at first glance. The difference between scrap metal and history, between failure and opportunity, is often nothing more than the courage to look a little closer. If this story inspired you, please leave a comment sharing the lesson that stayed with you the most. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring story filled with powerful life lessons. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.